This stuff's got the sting of a 48-hour blend.
One, two, one, two, one, two, one, two.
Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. I find myself in particularly good spirits today because now I find myself with the opportunity afforded to me to be able to speak once again about this wonderful work of art, which is Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me, directed by the one, the only Mr. David Lynch. Now, as some of you may know already, we have been already going through this work piecemeal, so bit by bit. And so today we find ourselves at another one of those bits of the film. And so if you're interested in past discussions, please, of course, feel free to check out some of those past videos. And then going forward, we will continue with this process until we get to the end. And then after that, we will try to wrap up the discussion with some kind of overall commentary or comments about this work writ large. But before we go, let us go focus on the next portion of this work, Twin Peaks. Before we enter into this discussion in earnest, once again, this is for people who have already seen the film, Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me. I may reference parts of discussion of the film that we have already focused on. I will try to avoid anything beyond any Twin Peaks story. Or in other words, I will focus my attention on everything leading up to Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me. What that means is, in terms of the chronological broadcast date and release date, seasons 1 and 2, and also the pilot of Twin Peaks, are stories that I might refer to as I talk about this work, Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me, as they occurred or were released prior to the release of Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me. However, I will avoid talking specifically and directly about any Twin Peaks story or episode or part that has been released after Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me. And so that's for the benefit of those who are continuing on with your Twin Peaks journey. Also, I don't want to, again, spoil anything going forward. I may make some general remarks in that direction, but of course, even in that mode of discussion, I will avoid spoilers where possible. So again, watching Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me is, I think, there is the understanding or supposition that one will have already seen the prior episodes, so the pilot and then seasons 1 and 2. So I might refer to those, but anything beyond that, I won't refer to, so just to keep in mind. But of course, we will save our discussions for the Twin Peaks stories that follow this film. We will save those discussions for another day in case you're interested. And also, I should point out that I do not claim at all to be in any way, shape, or form a Twin Peaks expert. So as some of you who have already seen my past Twin Peaks videos can, I'm sure, be witness to, I am in no way an expert. I have made a number of mistakes. I miss a lot of things. My interpretation skills are very much lacking. But at the same time, I come to this film, as I have with all Twin Peaks stories, I come to this film as a fan of this film. I absolutely marvel every single time I watch this film. It amazes me, it astounds me, it scares me, and it moves me very much. And I'll try to explain some of those reasons why I feel that way over the course of this. So I approach this work in that capacity as a big fan of this work, and indeed the works of David Lynch overall. David Lynch and Mark Frost, the creators, of course, of this wonderful world called Twin Peaks. And now we are brought here today to talk once again about this story within this world of Twin Peaks, this time Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me. So now you're still here, which means that we can now pick up the conversation where we last left off regarding this. And so we are still in the territory of Deer Meadow. We are still talking about the story of Special Agents Chet Desmond and Sam Stanley in their investigation, or their initial investigations, with regard to the murder of Teresa Banks. And they have investigated the body. They have had their run-in with the authorities, the local authorities. That's Deputy Cliff and Sheriff Cable, Deer Meadow Sheriff Station. They have talked to Irene and Haps. I forgot to mention before I move on, there's some really interesting details about the people who are part of this environment known as Haps Diner. So we talked a little bit about the people who are at the counter as Sam Stanley and Chet Desmond are talking to Irene, but also there's the people who are they encounter, I think, at the doorway. There's some elderly. There's an elderly gentleman, and there's a lamp, a flickering lamp. But there's actually a number of figures there, and so keep an eye out for, or keep in mind, for instance, how, say, the elderly, septuagenarian, octogenarians, etc., how the elderly are, and their visages and their features and say their physical say persona as captured on TV screens and film screens in the hands of David Lynch and Mark Frost and Company, how they form a very integral part of the world of Twin Peaks, such as Deer Meadow, such as Twin Peaks. We have met a number of these figures already in seasons 1 and 2 and in the pilot, and we meet them here, for instance, in the environment of Hap's Diner and Irene. After all, Irene is her name, and the flickering lights and some people who are sitting in the background. And indeed, let's keep this in mind too, because we may or may not see similar types of figures going forward in the context of Twin Peaks, including this film, Twin Peaks Firewalk, with the later scenes. So let's just keep that in mind. But in any event, yes, Sam Stanley and Chet Desmond are continuing their investigation after they have discovered some clues about the death of Teresa Banks, some real grisly clues at that as well. That brings them to the next part of this investigation, which is the trailer park, Fat Trout Trailer Park, where they understand that Teresa Banks was living, at least for some time, a little bit of time. And where does that bring them? That brings them to the office of the person who is running Fat Trout, which is none other than Carl. And don't knock before 9 a.m., of course. And so you get Carl in a very grumpy mood. And of course, what do we see, or who do we see playing Carl but none other than the one, the only Harry Dean Stanton, in that wonderful robe with a little bit of a band-aid on top of his brow there. We wonder what that is from. I'm not quite sure. There are always these injuries to the face throughout certain characters of Twin Peaks, especially perhaps even in the final episode of season 2. If you remember the final moment of the final episode of season 2, a particular episode had an injury to the face there. But I'm not saying that it's directly connected, but it's an interesting little detail that could or may or may not be a visual cue or connection, but or may not. But in any event, we have Carl here, the legendary Harry Dean Stanton, in that wonderful robe and that grumpy nature, because it's still quote unquote early. I love too the detail of how Sam Stanley and Chet Desmond are standing in the doorway with their badges held up there to protect them from the wrath of Carl. Now, this also reminds me of a number of people that we have seen in past episodes of the seasons where people have been standing at the doorway asking about people. For instance, remember when they were asking, they knocked at the door in one of the previous episodes about the Tremonts. Remember the Tremont household, which is near Harold Smith, and notice how the people are standing in the doorway there. Note too, also, I mentioned this too because, again, without getting into too much detail, there are scenes, again, in past episodes and maybe in future episodes where we'll have people standing in doorway frames, talking with people who are answering the door from the inside of the house. And they're actually having some pretty significant conversations, oftentimes to do with investigations that are ongoing, and sometimes having to do with really profound stuff. So just keep this in mind too. Here's another example of people standing in the doorway asking questions or approaching new characters. Here, Chet Desmond and Sam Stanley doing that with Carl, the great Harold Dean Stanton. And there's some conversation about Teresa Banks and about Carl, and also there is a visitor also that seems to express some kind of interest, perhaps in the special agents, or maybe in Carl, or maybe both, whatever. There's this elderly lady, another elderly figure with some kind of some maybe pack or something she's holding over her eye, and then going into the doorway here. So this is also a very maybe mysterious touch that is somewhat inexplicable in the moment, but it's a wonderful, inexplicable, mysterious David Lynch Twin Peaks moment. We're not sure if this character at the doorway is sinister or has ulterior motives or is a complete innocent in these matters. But in any event, there is a chill or eeriness in the air, and there's also the idea of Carl expressing in almost this random way about how he's been places. So we're not sure what the background is of Carl. Maybe he is someone who's always been at Fat Trout, or maybe, as he's indicated, he's been to places that are, as of now, unknown and mysterious to us, the viewer, as we were watching Twin Peaks unfold before our very eyes. But again, Carl, Harry Dean Stanton being Harry Dean Stanton, holds a lot of appeal and allure and a type of almost magical charm that is so, I think, very, very attractive. And so whatever stories Carl may or may not have, if those stories do emerge or are hinted at maybe later on in this film or even beyond, I'll be certainly there for the ride, as I always have been, because I think Carl's a really wonderful character, even in these moments that we meet him very very briefly, or at least during these introductory moments. Before I move any forward, before I go any further, I should point out too a lovely detail, which is so great about the scene between and among Sam Stanley and Chet Desmond and Carl, which is coffee. Remember when Carl brings them the coffee, and the coffee seems to be very strong, again, with my very poor Chris Isaak impression. When he takes a sip of the coffee, he's very almost maybe wonderfully agitated because of the strength of the coffee. What does he say? He says, he takes a drink and he says, this stuff's got the sting of a 48-hour blend, so that sort of thing. So it's very, very strong stuff. And so that actually is a really important detail in my eyes, because coffee here serves as a type of icebreaker. And before one can say that the scene between or among these characters was somewhat tense. After all, Carl was very grumpy. But after the coffee was served and it broke the ice and they're all kind of laughing, that seemed to loosen the spirits a bit. And so I really like that. I like how maybe Carl is naturally affable as a character, and or maybe it's coffee that has this sense of being a type of emotional emollient, in a manner of speaking. In other words, it makes things, it smooths things over, it lightens the mood, it breaks the ice. And I like that too, because coffee has this universal constant appeal in the world of Twin Peaks. It's almost like the peacemaker, or it's the olive branch, or it's that thing which I think everyone can understand. After all, coffee is, in some of the previous episodes, it's the subject of a lot of philosophical talk. For example, it's one of the examples of that Dale Cooper gives to Harry Truman about how one should buy oneself a little present every day, or treat oneself to a little present every day, which is a really lovely bit of life philosophy. Also, remember how the final episode of season 2, the end credits end, or the final episode does. There's an instance about coffee, and the sort of the way in which the physical trait of coffee changes from this liquid to a sort of ooze to a type of solid, and indeed also the idea of how coffee is in many ways formless and shapeless, which also points to the universal appeal of coffee. So coffee as the universal linkage of life, which is, I think, really quite remarkable. Also note too the idea of coffee and the reflection in the face that we see in the closing credits of the last season episode, season 2, last episode. So, and of course, how coffee has this great way of binding us and joining us together, and indeed forming bits of comedy. Of course, there was a fish in the percolator, a very famous quote from Pete, etc., from an early episode. So how coffee is this universal constant, universal thing, and even in the world of Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me. And one can say, maybe relatively speaking, this world of Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me is a colder, somewhat distant world when compared to, quote-unquote, the warmth of the season 1, season 2 Twin Peaks world. Even in this, quote-unquote, distant and colder world of Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me, there is still room for the warmth of coffee and the sting of the 48-hour blend. that Carl provides. And indeed, it's the icebreaker, it's the emotional emollient, which I really love and admire. So 3 cheers for coffee, right? Hip hip hooray, hip hip hooray, hip hip hooray. And of course, I know there will be more celebration of coffee going forward within this film, Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me, one hopes, and as well as perhaps future Twin Peaks stories going forward. But in any event, that's my little aside about the glory that is coffee. Now, going into the investigation aspect in relation to Teresa Banks and Fat Trout and her trailer and her living quarters and environment, we have this really kind of this really kind of powerful moment, or some powerful moments here, again reminding us of maybe how alone or seemingly alone Teresa Banks was in terms of maybe very little in terms of trinkets. We see the inside of the trailer, or the place where she lived, and we are reminded too of, say, the inside of the Palmer household, Laura Palmer, and how many pictures were there in the Palmer household. Her picture is also in the school. It's very, very famous. So many memories, so many trinkets, so many things to remember Laura Palmer by. But relative to that, very few things left behind that remind us who Teresa Banks was as a human being, which I think has this distancing effect. There's similarities, but also very many differences between the world of Twin Peaks, the TV show, and the world of Twin Peaks Fire Walk with You. But there's also a sense of unity and integration. But there is a picture of Teresa Banks, a very important picture. And this picture also shows the ring that's on her finger. And again, it reminds us too of the missing ring, or the indication that maybe something on her ring finger was there but was not when they were examining the dead body of Teresa Banks. And so here we have visual proof or evidence that suggests that there was a ring. And lo and behold, it has this green structure. It might have some kind of insignia that may or may not have a significance for those who remember a past episode of Twin Peaks, the TV show, especially revolving some designs or some signs or symbols relating to this place called Owl Cave. And so there is, again, some perhaps significance, something that may, in a visual sense, connect with the pastoral of Twin Peaks, may or may not. Again, we're not sure, but the ring is also very important. Now, again, too, rings we have seen in past Twin Peaks episodes, where rings have been very much a type of a key component. One is reminded, for example, of the ring and the giant, and right when Dale Cooper is there in the room and he's lying on the floor, in the ring, and the disappearance or reappearance of the ring at key moments of season 2 in particular of Twin Peaks. So the ring has this very important significance, as well as the circularity of it. And so circularity, the circular motion in the world of Twin Peaks, I think, is also very important as well when one thinks of the possibility of, say, repeated action. For instance, in seasons 1 and 2, we had, of course, maybe the repeated action of, say, the story, the tragic parallel between, say, the story of Laura Palmer, her death, and also what happened to Maddie Ferguson. So there's a circular aspect there, the parallel action that repeats itself. And let's keep this in mind too, how this ring, this image of the ring, serves, I think, a really important image when we think about the possibility of circularity, circular action, and perhaps even more specifically, repeated action, things that in a circular motion tend to repeat itself. And maybe they are the same, or maybe there are some slight differences, and maybe those slight differences go all the way in changing our whole dynamic and whole perspective. Again, we'll have to wait and see. But in any event, we have this very important or seemingly important aspect of the ring. Its importance is suggested to us, not least because it's not there. And so here we have yet another thing, at least at this point in time, something is in there but not there. Something has importance because of its absence. And again, what have we been saying since our earlier Twin Peaks discussions? But the idea of the donut hole, which is another ring shape, of course, which is the thing in the center, the absent hole, and then the dough that surrounds. And this idea, too, that this one of the ways of reading Twin Peaks is the idea of absence and presence. The importance of something being so important because of its absence. And so not only do you have the ring with the center, which has an absent hole, which itself signifies the existence of that which surrounds, but also the idea of that which is not there gains even more prominence. And what do we have but I think the ultimate example of that is the death of Laura Palmer, who for the most part is not there. But now we have here, again, that representation or symbol of the ring itself not being here. So what does that mean? What is the significance of that? We shall have to, of course, wait and see going forward. And indeed, perhaps later, in fact, a couple moments later from this, we might see the ring emerge and perhaps disappear once again. We'll talk about that momentarily. But so we have this visual clue of the disappearance or the mystery, excuse me, of the missing ring, and we have all these other details too that seem to suggest something amiss, perhaps something afoot, something not quite there to be even more subject to investigation. So what does this do? This brings us to, again, another clash between the authorities, again with the local authorities, Sheriff Cable and Deputy Cliff, and over the control of the body of Teresa Banks. Of course, the federal agents want to take Teresa Banks' body away from the local authority morgue and bring it back to federal authorities for further investigation. There is resistance at the sheriff station, Deer Meadow Sheriff Station, and there's also the talk about the ring. Did they have a ring? And there's a joke about, there's a phone here, it has a ring. And so that's a reminder too of this idea of use of humor as a way of deception, and also as a way of as a type of attack. And we see this in the world of David Lynch a lot, the idea of humor and laughter and comedy. It's very funny and very humorous, but also it's used and can be used in a very malicious way by certain characters. It can be used in a way to deflect, or it can be used in a way to change the topic of conversation, or in this case, to be a kind of direct affront to what Chet Desmond and company are trying to do. So. But Chet Desmond wins out in the end, of course, because they are able to take the body back, but not before, right? There's one final word between Sam Stanley and Chet Desmond. Of course, here Chet Desmond says he will go back one more time to the Fat Trout Trailer Park for just a follow-up investigation, and this is leading to the comment from Sam Stanley, who surmises that he was going back because of the blue rose. What does this mean, the blue rose? Remember the blue rose. We saw the blue rose on Lil, and this was something that in the car ride to Deer Meadow from Portland, this was one detail that Chet Desmond could not reveal to Sam Stanley, and thus to us, he could not reveal to us what the significance is of the blue rose. But it is now back. And so there's something about the blue rose and this investigation that has a certain, maybe even unearthly significance. Who knows? But this, whatever it is, this brings Chet Desmond back to Fat Trout one more time. And so we get some more information about the Fat Trout Trailer Park, which is interesting. So there's another person that seems to want, where's her hot water? I think her name is Margaret. And so as Carl is attending to Chet Desmond, he is also attending to one of the inhabitants of Fat Trout. So we also see that Carl has certain responsibilities as well with the people who are there. So that's an interesting detail to see. But we also have some interesting details about Fat Trout itself, because not only do we have Teresa Banks' trailer in one area, but we also have information that Deputy Cliff also lives there as well. So this is a very interesting detail. So they lived in close proximity, whatever that means. And then also there's this telephone pole with wires. And please note that when we go up to see the wires in the telephone pole, and has the 6 with a number of numbers there as well. Again, remember the significance, or perhaps possible significance, of numbers in Twin Peaks. Whenever we see numbers, we should or should not, again, depending on our point of view and reference points and inferences, and also points of interpretation, we can take these to have significant meanings, perhaps, maybe, yes, perhaps, possibly, probably. So there is this telephone pole with the 6 prominently displayed, as well as other numbers. And whenever we scroll up and see the telephone wires, please note the soundtrack and what we listen to. It sounds like a faint, maybe call, or a faint type of singing, or some kind of rhythmic call. And let's see if we can make that out in the soundtrack, and maybe we might hear something similar to that a little bit later in this film, Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me. But we do hear something that may suggest there's some sort of significance with this telephone pole or electricity wire pole, whatever it is, right? Electricity. Things and energy and waves and electricity. We saw it from the very outset, from the opening of this film, with the snow and the TV and the static, right? So maybe electricity and waves and signals and signs have some deep meaning, as indicated with this pole, this electricity pole, with the 6 prominently displayed there. But in any event, this is also part of the geography of Fat Trout. So we have Deputy Cliff, we have Teresa Banks, we have this pole. And what's interesting is, right, note this, Carl Rod indicates that Teresa Banks's trailer is here at one point in the trailer park, and that Deputy Cliff's place is here in another part of the trailer park, and they're walking towards Deputy Cliff's trailer when Carl is called away by another inhabitant. That leaves Chet Desmond alone. And Chet Desmond, right, what does he do? He seems to recognize or see this pole, and he looks in both directions, but he doesn't go in the direction of Deputy Cliff's place, right? He goes in the opposite direction, which I think is very interesting. He goes to a place where it seems like it's a different trailer indeed. We get a shot of this trailer. It seems very innocent looking enough, and we're not sure exactly what the significance is of this trailer yet. Anyway, we will find out a little bit later in someone who lives there, but as of now, we're not quite sure. And he goes and he sees and he investigates. We hear some sinister underpinnings on the soundtrack. And what do we find underneath? There is something underneath that attracts Chet Desmond's attention. What does it seem to be? It seems to be like a mound of earth or dirt with something on top of it. What is it? Oh, it looks like a ring. It looks like some kind of ring is there. So this is very interesting. Let's stop here for a moment and see what we can make of this, if at all, right? Because we have a mound of dirt or mound of earth, and we have some kind of jewelry or something atop of it. We have seen issues or things about mounds of earth and dirt and burying. Of course, we have seen this in the past episodes of Twin Peaks, the show, with Donna and James and the locket, which is one little clue here from the world of Twin Peaks. Of course, we've seen too this idea of the earth and some kind of mound of dirt or something at the location or the site of the killing of Laura Palmer, as indicated through the investigation of Sheriff Truman and Dale Cooper and others. So this is this idea of earth and mounds of earth or dirt and burying and trinkets or jewelry seem to be very important as well in the world of Twin Peaks. And what do we have here under this trailer? Some kind of innocent looking, seemingly innocent looking mound of dirt with something on top of it. It looks like a ring. Now, what have we been thinking about, or one of the things we've been thinking about thus far until now, which is the missing ring of Teresa Banks. Lo and behold, could this be, in fact, the missing ring that we have been talking about for all this time? It may be. Let's see if we can find out. And what does he do? What does Chet Desmond do? He reaches for that thing, crouches down, reaches underneath, and then fade. What a great fade. This is what a great fade. You know, there are some films that people often regard as having some of the great edits in cinema history. For instance, there's a famous film by Stanley Kubrick, the artist Stanley Kubrick, called 2001: A Space Odyssey. And there, in that film, somewhat early on in that film, there is an example of what is considered to be one of the greatest edits in cinema history, in terms of an edit from one shot to another shot. Now, as I am joining in the chorus in terms of my own feelings and celebratory atmosphere, mood, and awe and respect, feelings of respect for that film, 2001: A Space Odyssey. But I dare say that this fade out, it's kind of a freeze frame and fade out of Chet Desmond, right, as he reaches for whatever this is. It kind of freezes and then fades to black. and it cuts really quickly to the next scene, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Now, this has to be one of the great edits. This is one of the great edits of not just this film, but indeed of any film that I have encountered in my own, say, personal cinema journey. This is so subliminally innocent looking. It seems very much of maybe a passing thing, a very minor thing, but in fact, it has ramifications and shock waves that I think ripple throughout the rest of this film, and indeed potentially Twin Peaks lore writ large, because of course it means that maybe we will never see Chet Desmond again. Maybe it means that something to do with the magic and mystery and indeed the sinister, maybe evil nature of what he was reaching out for, which is what we thought was this ring. And also this idea of appearing and disappearing. Now, did he disappear? Is he gone? Did he leave? Is he dead? Is he alive? What is going on? We have seen, of course, characters appear and disappear in the context of Twin Peaks, and who knows what has happened to Chet Desmond, at least in the very near future. For the purposes, at least, of our conversation of Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me, at least these first few minutes anyway. So who knows what is going on, but there has been so much, I think, interpretation and so much, say, doubt, and also so much excitement and wonder. And also this, I think, leads to further possibilities of where Chet Desmond is, if he is anywhere at all, or maybe this is the end of the road for Chet Desmond. Who knows? Maybe this shows the significance and power of the ring. Also, what is the significance of where he finds it? Whose trailer is this? What is going on? What is the significance of this possible place? Now, we will have to find out a little bit more information as we get into the further minutes of Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me. Also, I should point out, too, before I get too ahead of myself, I should point out that recall that Chet Desmond was walking towards Deputy Cliff's trailer, right? But then he stops, he looks around, the electricity pole, looks up, looks around, and turns back. For whatever reason, he was drawn back to this place, which is in the opposite direction, right, of that trailer that Carl was going to show him. Why did he turn around? What is the significance of it? What was his instinct that made him want to turn around and go into the direction where he wanted to go? Was he sensing something? Did he notice a clue? Was there something in that particular point in the Fat Trout Trailer Park that indicated to him that there was some significant clue that should lead him to the opposite direction? Who knows? This shows but it obviously led him somewhere very significant because of the way this scene abruptly ends. And we can carry with that some kind of import of, yes, something very sinister and significant indeed. So not only is this significant, not only is this a type of bold and perhaps even shocking, yet subtle edit that essentially ends this chapter of the film, but also it is an indication or a conclusion of, I think, one of the great, maybe almost even unsung heroes of the world of Twin Peaks. That is the character of Chet Desmond. What a great character he is. Will we see him again? Of course, we shall have to wait and see. Will we find out what has happened to him? Again, we shall have to wait and see if those answers are yielded to us or not in future Twin Peaks stories. But in any event, I think this has capped off what is a fascinating and really bold turn in the way that the Twin Peaks stories are being told. I think we were asked to essentially go along with Chet Desmond's story, not really knowing him until we meet him for the first time in Fargo, and then we go from there. But I think, at least from my own experience, I can say that I was totally with him, and I am totally with him throughout this particular journey that we have been privy to. One of my favorite characters, and this is one of my favorite segments and sections of this film, and indeed of any film, and indeed of any Twin Peaks story. So, and that makes this cut and this fade to black and this slight freeze frame all the more tantalizing and enigmatic. And tantalizing, enigmatic, those adjectives, I think, are so appropriate when one is speaking about this segment of Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me. Indeed, talking about Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me overall. Tantalizing and enigmatic indeed. Chet Desmond. Wow, what a character. What a character indeed.